Thanks, Stephen. And do we have, yeah. Yep. We'll see how we go with this on that. There's probably more material there than we have time for, but let's see how we go. And I'm also aware that, many of you, don't live and breathe epistemology. And, obviously your life is the poorer for it. Nonetheless, we all get through. So I say that not in any kind of, well, there's a lot of spirits that I'm not saying that in, but I say it in the constructive spirit, meaning I'll take a little time to kind of maybe give you a bit more of the background for this issue. Because what I'm going to do is engage critically, more or less, with what, for many of you, I think has become almost a bad term in epistemology, in philosophy, post-Gettier epistemology. How many of you heard the term, you hear about Gettier and you think, oh gosh, that's just like a degenerating research program. It's so old, it went out, it just had its day, it's gone. Thank goodness we move on. My guess is that some of you, it's like that. Well, fair enough, but there are always better and worse reasons to move on in philosophy. And, one potentially bad reason is, well, we just got tired of it. But I understand it is a real reason. But I'll try to give you what I hope is a better reason, a more to worry about whether Gettier, what I call Gettieristic epistemology, really has been worth experiencing. All right, so for those of you for whom this is not so familiar, I'll just take a moment to give a little, there we go. Yep. Okay, so let me just say something of background here, because I am aware that, welcomely, we are a very broadly grounded group here. That's great. And so let me spread a little epistemology among you. So in 1963, Fred, I think, 1965 was it? You said 60 years ago or so? Well, let's just take it back slightly more. It wasn't only Dylan going on at the time in America. So there was Edmund Gettier in 1963, published this paper, which was an amazingly high percentage of his overall published corpus. That sounds condescending. I don't mean it. It's just kind of amusing in a way, especially in such a professionalized, world we now live in universities. So anyway, this paper in analysis, 1963, is Justified True Belief Knowledge. Made an amazing impact. It's, the old cat among the pigeons. We must engage with that. Look what he's come up with. Surely it's so easy and we can just get rid of this. This annoyance, dispose of it, answer it, dispose of it. Well, 62 years later, which I don't know where we are with it really. But anyway, the background is that, so this is why people talk of post-Gettier epistemology. The term I now use is Gettierism, which, interpret that as you wish. It's just meant to be a neutral term, though I suppose it could be heard. Anyway, so we live in, whether you like it or not, and whether you are consciously, actively engaged in it, whenever you come across epistemologists, they are more or less, they've somehow imbibed the spirit of Gettierism. And Gettierism, as I understand it here, is, well, we don't have to live and breathe the kind of 60 plus years of frustration, which I'll say a bit about in a moment, where people have gone back and forth. What can we do to get round this challenge that Edmund Gettier came up with? What can we do? So we can get on to other things, like making the world better, a la Bob Dylan there, etc. No. We must dispose of this analytic, conceptual, seemingly precisely formulated problem here. It's got to be easy. Well, it wasn't. But why wasn't it? And that's where I come in on this, because I think from a few ways, we've had 60 years of to some extent, misdescribing or misunderstanding the original problem. People jump too quickly. They jump too quickly in describing, setting up the problem that Gettier supposedly gave us. And now with 60 years hindsight, a quick, simple, superficial, and where there has been no agreement. The point is, for those of you for whom this is not so familiar, there is still no clear agreement. And I know it's philosophy, so we thrive on disagreement, but I mean, really, there's not been any agreement about back and forth about potential theories and accounts that would dispose of this challenge, which I'll take you through in a moment. And so the easiest kind of response of frustration to that is the obvious one, to say 60 years, well, that's, even in spite of philosophy having millennia behind it, nonetheless, 60 years has got to be a good enough sample, and we must know that that's, at least inductively, there's inductive evidence that it's not going to, we're on the wrong track. Oh, what are we going to do? Oh, gosh. Okay. I'll give you a different argument, but also equally with the hindsight of the 60 years as we see it. But okay, let me say just a little bit of background. So as I say here, a basic point about, so when I say that all of us, we're living in epistemology, the idea is that we're in this Gettieristic epistemological world. That's not meant to mean, which would be false, that everyone who calls himself an epistemologist sets themselves up to be engaging with Gettier. I mean, over 60 years, there's been flurries of real involvement. People got tired of it. Real involvement, people got tired of it. Blah, 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 back and forth, back and forth. Okay. But it doesn't matter. On this model, and for this term Gettierism, even when people sort of moved away because, there are other potential, great topics to deal with, and they got frustrated, the times they were still Gettieristic at that time. And the times were not a-changing in that way, and they still haven't. Because the point of the term Gettierism is that, as you'll see in a moment, there's a basic kind of claim he made twice in his paper, and that that's rarely been disputed by those who have attended to this. And people have decided, when they want to construct theories of knowledge, because that's what's at stake here, some kind of supposedly conceptual understanding, more or less analytical, but that's not the key here, some kind of discursive, supposedly precise and exhaustive understanding of the nature of knowledge. Running behind all that has been the idea that any of those attempts somehow have to be able to be answerable to the idea that whether or not he came up with some kind of response to what he did, Gettier gave us a truth. And, they can be few and far between, it seems, in philosophy, or at least ones that have had the kind of almost total acceptance that his basic claim had. So we know that in what we work on, all around this room, lots and lots of good projects, people disagree, and we thrive on disagreement about things. As Fred alluded to blood sports. Well, even when it's not blood sports, people respectfully disagree. But they haven't about this basic claim that Gettier made. And so we'll get to that now. The idea then that Gettier was right. I don't say that because I'm saying he was right. This is just a report from the front. So, what was he right about? All right, so as I said there, I'm jumping forward a little. What was supposedly at stake, one formulation or another, was a basic idea, what's now come to be called, as many of you are aware, that the justified true belief definition or analysis or whatever, conception. Really, I'm happy any of these terms here, but people traditionally talked of it as a definition because there was a right-hand side and a left-hand side, and we could talk about necessary conditions and sufficient conditions and all that. All right, so the idea was that somehow or other, Gettier described these two cutesy little cases. It sounds condescending, but they were cute. Little cases, fanciful tales, in which they seemed to be internally coherent. And the idea was that, as we'll see there, let's focus on one of them in a moment, but he only dealt with half of this potential conception. And the idea, as I indicate there, supposedly he disproved its being enough, hence the sufficiency part of this. If someone is going to be knowing that P being some propositional, having propositional form there, simply to have a well, even if fallibly justified true belief that P. For short, people say justified true belief. Should always remember, it's quite relevant, that it is actually meant to be fallible justification. But anyway, so this was the idea that supposedly what was up for grabs. Some say that philosophers weren't particularly aware of this being up for grabs before Gettier. So one of his contributions was to even make, as often good philosophers do, the trick is just to even put a question in front of you, right? Well, in theory, you could say, so he effectively was saying, here's the question: is this a full and similar and sufficiently precise and informative conception of the nature of knowing? His answer, no, not in one respect. For sufficiency fails. So, because the idea was, as in his stories, someone could have a justified true belief, which, don't we all agree? Yes, yes, yes. Nonetheless, failed to be knowledge. So he had two cases, and the first of them is the one that people have focused on more. In terms of the logical stuff involved, it seems simpler. All right, so again, I know that, excuse me, I know that some of you are very familiar with this, and I'm sorry about that, but obviously I want everyone, as much as possible, everyone to be, involved in the thinking and so on. So, all right, so the bottom line was, I won't go through every word of the thing, but the bottom line is you've got someone with Smith, gets this kind of good evidence. It's kind of normal, everyday sort of good evidence. It's coming from the company president, and apparently Smith's knowledge of Jones's pocket, its contents. And that evidence leads to Smith's believing that Jones is going to get the job in this company and that Jones has these 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, straightforward. From that Smith deduces that he gets the final belief there that the person who get the job has 10 coins in the pocket. Okay, so basically normal kind of standard evidence, talking to the company president, has been counting these coins. Okay, what do you infer? Okay, Jones is going to get that job. Okay, Jones got 10 coins. Fascinating. And what do we get from that? The person who's going to get the job has 10 coins. Everyday reasoning. And then we get to the kind of Gettier trick, the trick in the case, however it works. That's right. So anyway, so the idea is then that, so what happens is that as it happens, that final belief, the one that's almost disappearing there, that the person who'll get the job has 10 coins in the pocket, is true. But as many of you are aware, it's not because of any facts about Jones, including therefore those things that he was basing his belief on. But it's true because Smith's going to get the job. All right. And again, Smith has no awareness of those facts about himself. All right. So the idea is, for example, if it's not there in the case, but if someone was to ask Smith, right, Smith's internal subjectively accessible perspective on his situation is purely based on the stuff that he's been told about Jones. So perfectly normal, reasonable, reason that through, a bit pedantically, but gets to this belief. Fine. The belief happens to be true, but not for the reason that Smith had any awareness of. Okay, is everyone clear on the? Okay. Okay, now that's the standard interpretation of the case, and meaning in this, for my purposes, the Gettieristic interpretation, the one that we've had, but almost all epistemologists for 60 plus years on this stuff, is that, okay, you just tick off the elements of the JTB conception. There's this final belief. Yeah, it's true. Made true by facts about Smith, but it's true. It's fallibly justified. Seems pretty good evidence. The company president, directly counting the coins, no problem, plus some elementary deduction, standard stuff, okay? So that's how we get to the J part, the justified. And now we get to the supposedly almost the one-liner in the paper, and seems to satisfy people. But Smith fails to know. Why? Oh, well, don't worry about that right now. But Smith fails to know. If so, that's a result. I mean, I didn't write down here the quote that some of you would realise, but no less a person than David Lewis has. The quotation was something. Someone might correct it, and I have quoted it before, but it was something like, what was it? Philosophical proofs, results. What was it? Proofs of extremely rare in philosophy. Gödel did it, and Gettier might have done it. Something, words to that effect. It's an introduction to one of his collections. So we're talking, whether or not, that's significant if it's true. If he really did show that. The point being, see, the theory is, see, if he says that he can trace this JTB conception all the way back to Plato, it's in there, etc., in the Meno and the Theaetetus in greater or lesser extent. Then he cites a few more contemporary people. You can find a similar thing in Kant. You can find roughly this conception in Kant and so on. But I don't know. But that's his claim. It's a very quick bit of history. The theory, though, in theory, the idea is that's where how big the stakes are. That there's this conception which potentially has kind of gone unquestioned, potentially been accepted one form or another for a long time. And here he comes along, blows it out the water. All right, so as I say there, that was the fount of all things subsequently Gettieristic. So where are we now? Oh gosh, meta-Gettier. For those of you who thought it was just safe to go back into the water, the epistemological water, I'm sorry. Isn't it 50 years? They're making a big deal about Jaws the other day, which I've never seen. But all right, so anyway, so 1963, post-Gettier epistemology underway. So, but here's the thing. So what the structure of it has been, for those when they've focused on it, has been, we take for granted that Smith failed to know. That's a given in a few ways. That's a given. But it's epistemology. How should we revise our conception of knowledge as a result? And in particular, therefore, what's the first step is, let's try to understand what has gone wrong in the case. Why is the belief not knowledge? So this is partly, it'll be illustratively helpful. I'll just give you quickly here and extend it a little in a moment, because no one really took up the help that Gettier himself gave. He gave a few very brief comments here in explaining it, but there's a clear reason why people didn't jump on it. But anyway, so as he said there about why Smith's belief is not knowledge, quote, it's true in virtue of the number of coins in Smith's pocket. Okay, Smith doesn't know how many coins are in Smith's pocket and bases his belief on account of the coins in Jones' pocket. He falsely believes to be the man who'll get the job. I mean, that's all pretty clear. So whether or not it's an analysis, it's Gettier at least trying to, point us towards something that, as he sees, something that's gone awry there. What do we do with that? Well, we'll see. So I've summed that up very easily there. Smith will get the job. Smith has 10 coins. those facts are jointly making true his belief, the final one, but neither of them is known by him to obtain. Neither is he mentioned by his evidence. That's all fine. So I've just generalized it a bit here because the reason I'm doing this is not because, as I say there at the bottom there, we're not committed to that account, and I'm not either. But there's a reason why it's going to be helpful, because in terms of time, how much I can cover here, the main thing, I'll at least take you through one thing. And that particular thing is what I'm getting at when talking about metagedia. And so what I want is at least for you to have a clear sense in your head of the structure of this case. Whether or not you completely think this is the right way to go about analysing it, it's not critical for me here. But at least want it so you can, in effect, look at, so you've kind of internalised the picture of the case. And then because we're going to see that picture cropping up again in another case. So let's just work for this for the moment, that we're talking about the idea that X's belief that P is made true by some circumstance of which there's no mention in X's supporting evidence. Note, by the way, as I look at it there, one thing I've done with that, it's not a definition, it's just a description which can be instantiated, I hope, usefully. Note, I dropped the word knows. One reason I think why people just didn't, I don't know, I guess I wasn't there at the time, but I guess that one of the reasons people didn't jump on Gedier's own conception or his own comments was he used the word no. And so insofar as people took the challenge to be to come up with a reductive definition, a reductive conception, conceptually reductive conception, the idea was therefore we can't repeat the word no or some cognate. So insofar as he was committed to that in his kind of response, yeah, we have to move on. But it's not, I don't think that's a bit too restrictive, I think. We can do better. We can still work with some of the suggestiveness of what he gave us. So anyway, so here's a question. All right, so let's now return to the idea that the key thesis in Gedierism is the thesis that supposedly kickstarted these 60 years of, whether you like it or not, it's been there as a big part of epistemology for over 60 years. It's generated different conceptions of knowledge. It's generated conceptions of epistemic justification, either independently or as part of the conception of knowing, all that stuff. It's been very, very active. So all that's good, it all comes off, but it doesn't get going unless you accept in the beginning the basic standard Gedieristic interpretation. And at the heart of that is what I'm calling, let's just say, let G be the belief that Smith's belief is not knowledge, right? In other words, if you don't have that belief, you don't have a Gedier case. You've got an slightly oddly justified true belief. Okay, and then it leads to some, and that belief, what is it? Well, do we have debate about this? I don't know. No, people agreed that it's not knowledge. So that's why I say it was the basis for Gedierism. So, and what I at least want to take you through is an argument. It's not conclusive, I think, but I think it's suggestive and it's a fun one to think about. About the epistemic strength of that belief, the basic Gedieristic belief. I mean, and I know this could look sort of trivial. It's a silly little case, and we look, oh, is it belief? Is it knowledge? Is it not? No. Does Smith know? And that can sound silly. No. Remember, what's at stake here is, a slightly, it's a cutesy, but that's just it's an inessential aspect of what's going on here. The idea is, have we come up with potentially like some formula for undermining what would otherwise seem like a really potentially clear conception of knowing, one that you can go and take to your other areas of philosophy, just take out into the world. People talk about knowledge. Have they got truth? Turn to check on. Now evaluate their evidence. Think about justification in this form. How well are they situated? What's their standpoint? You had to use an obvious word there. What's their background? Lots of things that have usefully come up over 60 years. You know, they are. I mean it. They are they're genuinely interesting, potentially useful in lots of things, you know, offshoots, etc., in philosophical ways. But at least in epistemology, a lot of that started back with this, which, you know, as I say, it can, if you lose track of that kind of what's come off it, it can look a bit, you know, it can look a bit trivial, but I don't think it is. So, and the reason I come back to it is in this way is because it, as I say, just think of the David Lewis quote there. This is not just some belief that some philosophers accepted. It had almost had, and over 60 years has continued to have almost, it seems, I think that's fair to say, almost universal acceptance among epistemologists. A few people have questioned it, but not many. So there's a couple of ways it's been questioned in the last 20 years, and that might come up in questions. But for the moment, let's just focus on the idea of the core idea here that the many, many epistemologists, and then, by the way, as in my experience, Gettier is such an easy thing to just introduce, like to a general first introductory philosophy course. You know, it can be like a first or second class. You know, you just want to start some, you know, even first year students off thinking about the nature of knowledge. It's so easy to, my experience, I've seen it, Gettier can be set up there in the first meeting, and it's a quick grab because anyone can read the case, have a reaction. What's the reaction? Well, it's been almost universally not knowledge. Right. Let's now, as this course goes on, we're going to start thinking about theories that have come up, right? And we're going to try to get more precise. And this is your example. This is your introduction to how philosophers have tried to start thinking critically and carefully about the nature of knowledge. And aren't we lucky to live in a time, it will be said, when this sort of thinking got going? Yes, we are. All right. And yet we don't, if I'm right here, I also just think there are times to revisit these things. And so the simple question I have here, which I will at least get through that argument, is that whether we know that Smith fails to know. So that's why actually the title for this talk shouldn't have had a comma in it, which a couple of places it did. It's about not knowing, not knowing. So the not knowing, the second not knowing here is Smith, and the first not knowing is potentially epistemologists when they come to Smith here, when they meet and engage with this. So that's the question here was, I'm not saying that post-Gettier epistemology, it's nothing if it wasn't founded upon knowledge. That's not the point behind that final question there. Just take the question at face value. And I ask it in that form because it has long seemed to me that, again, I quote David Lewis, if epistemologists are going to be able to point to anything that they don't have to proceed to question as their theorizing gets going, isn't it, I will be asking rhetorically if I was one of many of them, isn't it this? Namely, this is a bit of epistemological knowledge. We know as epistemologists that Smith didn't know. Great. Now let's get to work and theorize. All right, so that is the question. And now let me start going through it. An answer. I don't say the answer. Might be. But an. Mitigatia. Okay, now, So I take it that, well, let's just work through as we've got it there. There's a lot of ways to do this. So just as a matter of fact, over the last 60 plus years, I say there's been lots of attempts, A1 to AN, or there I've got there, to say why or how GB is true. So the general form there is what I've got in quotes, that AI, some I there, directs us to what must go right for a belief if it's to avoid Smith's fate. Now, I say fundamental or basic because I'm just trying to make it simpler, and obviously within a basic or a fundamental idea, professionalism will lead to lots of variations. So just think of like genus and species if you want here. All right, so take it as the most, if you want to look at it, and you suppose you were highlighting what are the most basic, distinct kinds of ways that people have sought to engage with this. Okay, so just however many there are. So there they are. It just as a matter of fact, there's been a bunch. And that's just, the history of the last 60 years in epistemology. Now, what I ask you to think about here is what I have there. Just consider, I want you to think about potential inferential structure here, which we're going to come back to in the section. We'll have time for that. But for the moment, consider the idea if someone says to you, Smith's belief's not knowledge, and you say why, maybe I agree, it's not knowledge, it's obviously something's gone wrong, blah, blah, blah. But why is it not knowledge? So maybe that person is teaching but didn't want to push, and they said, well, there's been a bunch of basic attempts to understand this. Let me sort of lay them out there. Okay, there you go. And so the idea behind each one of them, this is an attempt to say why GB is true, or to attempt to say how it's true, right? To explain it, to understand. A bunch of terms you can use there. All right, so there they are. Now, if GB is true, which is seems to be taken for granted by epistemologists, I'm going to assume here, as I say, they're in an epistemologically realist spirit about this. It's true for some reason. It's not just that people got together and agreed, nodded their heads at each other in a supportive circle and said, yeah, we all think it's right, and that's it. No, let's assume there's a realist spirit. There is some reason, A star. Okay, so we've got GB, and there's some reason, A star, that why it's true, if it's true. Now, it's a very simple bit of the argument. Since I said that A1 to AN, they're more like generic rather than species competitors. So I've set it up, they compete with each other. Sure, in theory you can combine, people do, and that's part of professional life and these things. We look for synthesis and all that too. That's fine. This is just more abstract about this. So they compete with each other. So as I've got there, either all or almost all of them are false, just how it is. Hence, at most, one of them is A star and maybe none of them is A star. But again, as I say, by hypothesis, they are Getty-heuristic epistemologies, many, fundamental or basic, attempts to say why or how GB is true. So either all or almost all Getty-heuristic epistemologists have offered this A1 to AN. That's kind of the sum of 60 years there on this stuff. And between them, they're all or almost all of them are unaware. They're focused on potentially their favoured view. Maybe it's A star, maybe it isn't, but what are the odds? All right, so let's keep going then. So that's the setup. So the fun, now we get to the fun. So you are rewarded now. Concentrating. So the idea is here, as this is set up so far, is that those same Getty heuristic epistemologists, again, which you can include some of our most revered and justly respected in many ways, epistemologists who've led the field over the 60 years, and I mean that seriously. Okay, this is genuine. It's but nonetheless, if the argument's right, it's what I want to think through, and you can help me. So what I wanted you to think about here is what looks to me like a parallel. That this is what I said at the beginning of the talk. I said, with the 60 years of hindsight, rather than just say, oh, well, it's all been hard and difficult, we have inductive evidence, none of them is going to be right. Sure, that move does get made. Okay, but I said I would offer you another argument that directly calls on those 60 years, and didn't have to. This could have been done hypothetically in advance, but as it is. So let's cash out that first claim. So GB, the belief that Smith's belief is not knowledge, that's made true by A star, right? So there is a circumstance that makes it true. Okay, but then all the Getty heuristic epistemologists among us over the 60 years plus, and each one of them by hypothesis here have chosen or would choose one or more, depending on the day, one or more of A1 to AN as their accounts of Y. So if A star is not among those ones, if A star, whatever it is, happens never to have been among those to which various epistemologists have plighted their troth, then GB is being made true by a circumstance of which all or almost all Getty heuristic epistemologists have been unaware. Now, okay, fine. We all know that it's been difficult. Well, not all of us, but I'm telling you, and it's been difficult and people have struggled and no one's, but I'll take you through a bit. Let me jump to that in a moment. The point is so far that when epistemologists often will get together and they'll say, yeah, sure, we haven't yet worked out why what's gone wrong in Getty cases. We haven't worked that out. And so in this case, it's like saying, I'm focusing it here. We haven't worked out, we can't all agree on why Smith's belief is not knowledge, okay? Sure. But it is possible. I mean, do they therefore not know? That's not my argument. All right, that's just, in effect, making the pragmatic kind of agreement the crucial thing, and I'm not focusing on that. This is just a structural point. As far as I'm concerned, one person in that, over the 60 years might have got it right. That person's theory, which maybe was published in a very obscure journal, no one read it, no one ever picked up on it, but it was A star. Oh, that does sound good, doesn't it? Now I think so it was the A star account. So they got the truth, but all the more fancied sort of discussions and all that just passed it by. Okay, so that person would potentially, up to a point, escapes this argument, maybe. But the point is, all the others, no matter how rewarded they are for their accounts, no matter how interesting, and I mean this, no matter how genuinely intellectually interesting and challenging and all that their accounts are, they would still be in this A1 to AN, but not A star. Okay, so what that means is that they're basically like Smith. But their account, they're like Smith in their belief about Smith. So remember, Smith's getting the belief that the person who's going to get the job has 10 coins in the pocket. That's made true by a circumstance. So stuff about Smith. Smith's been up here focusing on evidence and all that about Jones. Never, doesn't take in the idea about himself. Okay, so the pathway to that belief, or the inferential pathway, doesn't involve the claim of any stuff about himself. Okay. Now, so the structure here that I've got is that if take the belief Smith's belief is not knowledge. That's being made true by A star, which is over here, like the facts about Smith. But but we, when we form, if we're going to try to, let's potentially know that Smith's belief is not knowledge, what's going to make that belief of ours about Smith knowledge for us? Well, apparently we're going to be relying, at least when we try to understand why it's not knowledge, we're going to be talking about all these other theories, A1 to AM, but not A star. So we're also going through these other, we're off here following paths here, like Smith was following stuff about Jones. All right, so in that sense, as I set that up, if he fails to know, so do they. Not as a direct inference, but here by analogy and by extending the kind of case. All right. Now, again, I said in advance, this is not a proof, but I think it's suggestive. The basic point is you've got a structure, and I'll give you one potential reply to this claim in a moment. But the idea is that you've got a structure going on here that the point is they look. I'm honestly not trying to rely. It could look like, depending on Getty's own views, I don't think so, but I think they're suggestive. But all I'm trying to suggest here is the two cases look remarkably similar. And insofar as people often respond to the Getty case, whoa, that's not knowledge. Well, why not just do the same with the epistemologists there? Well, they don't know. They don't know that Smith doesn't know. They're meta-Gettyian. An objection. All right. So I've tried in giving that description, I tried to be careful about what I'm about to engage with. And I said, sort of, in setting it up as an inferential structure, they look really similar. Okay, now I did that because there are a few reasons, and I'll explain some of them in a moment. But here's the objection. It's the question. Are Gettyeristic epistemologists helpfully different to Smith when they're forming that belief? As in, whoa, not knowledge about him. So this is devil's advocate from my point of view. As Getty has set it up, Smith inferred his final belief. It's explicitly that he's got this evidence, he reasons, reaches his belief. Okay, so inferential structure. Okay, now I'm going to I put this here because I'm going to assume that a bunch of you will be tempted, will want to say in reply that there's a difference here, that at least this difference, that when they, whoever initially meets a Gettier case, whoever can intuit that final belief. So effectively, that belief about Smith, that it's there by knowledge. So it's the old, that's just intuitively not knowledge. That's just intuitively obvious. I'll just keep saying it one way or another. So look, I'm just, in response to that, which I'm sure would be suggested, I will go through a few possible. I do find this very unsatisfying, and let me just talk around this a bit. Stephen, what? 10 minutes, 15? What have we got? 10 minutes? All right, I can do that. I can raise the questions here about some questions in response to this objection. It's in professional terms, in terms of, I'm sure how a lot of you have, do philosophy. I hope it'll reflect some of, how you might respond to the argument so far. Okay, so this is just a way of sort of focusing my response, which is, I say, the idea of an epistemological moment. So I'll give you a few cases. But I'll tell you in advance, the point is I'm never not quite sure what to make of as an epistemologist. Or even philosopher. I don't do it myself. I don't argue by saying, oh, my intuition is, and I think I never have done that. And it's not some superior thing. I just never, I'm not sure what to do with it. And I don't, so I've a few cases. Imagine a so-called intuitive response to Getty's tale occurring. There's the tale response. Suddenly, just like the world ends, done, everything. The word obliterated becomes, much more powerful there. So the world ends. So question, and I'm not giving an argument, I've got more stuff written there, but I'm happy to talk it more. But my question for it, the case is, was that right there, had that already been enough to be a moment of epistemology? Right, and that's why I say already. So the world ends, a Getty case had been put before the person, it's the first time I want. And, oh, not knowledge, done. The world's done. Now, the question is, I'm asking it because at least for me, to me, that feels more like, no, it had started being, it's taken a step towards being an epistemological moment, but it hasn't done enough yet to be an epistemological moment. It's like the first moment within the moment kind of thing, but it's a sub moment. But don't quote me on that one. So, all right, more practically, as is those of us who teach Getty cases, though being emeritus, I've stopped. So a student's initial encounter with Getty's cases. So just imagine the case, and I'm sure a number of you had this, the student says, Smith's belief is not knowledge. And that's it. End of response. Is that enough for the response to be epistemological? Or is something more needed? And again, obviously I ask this because, my own view is, for what it's worth at this point, and it's not conclusive, I'm not claiming it is that to me that's the start of being epistemological, and that's it. As I'll sum up in a moment, but it's give you another kind of case. I mean, I've got here, imagine in the course's final exam, the student writing on Getty's case offers no intended account of how Smith's belief is not knowledge. So it's just, blah, 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 it's not knowledge, done. Well, I would mark that as 0. Sorry, hypothetical person. But if that's all they do, they just say, well, no, it's not knowledge, and that's it. I suppose if I was generous, I might get 5. It's out of 100. So, all right, so let's ramp it up a little. So again, in that final exam, the students wrote, Smith's belief's not knowledge, and they add, I know this intuitively. What do you mark that one as? You don't want to know my mark for it. I mean, okay, so I'm a hard marker, maybe, but I don't see why, actually. Seriously, if it's an epistemology exam there, I use this it's just illustrative, right? But it's for you genuinely think about it. It's an easy kind of case to think about. We all teach, you mark, you do this kind of stuff. And you do have to, think about what's been offered and how, in a way, how philosophical was the response, which is the bigger question behind what I'm asking here. Right? It's not just about epistemology, it's about being philosophical, at least as I see it. Right? Just to say that's not knowledge, and even if they add on, I know this intuitively, I'd say, well, good job. As in, nice work if you can get it. But it's not, I'm still not going to add marks on because you said, and I know it intuitively. Again, maybe you would, but I don't. So the proposal on this, again, off this bit, for you to come back at me about it is, as the way I see it here is that intuitive knowledge, if I'm going to be generous and say that was knowledge, and let it be called intuitive, whatever intuitive is, let it be intuitive, fine. But to me, that still feels pre-epistemological, even pre-philosophical. And you need something more for it to be epistemological. And that's why I get back to, I've got a couple of minutes here, so I'll sort of jump ahead, but the irony is that Gettier himself, when he talked back to the Meno, and the Meno's conception there was actually about the etius logismos, and that was actually the active calculating of the facts. This is the Harris Black translation from 1961. It is a point about, and this conception here, the idea was not just coming up with what we call supportive evidence, but the idea was that, in effect, calling it the logos, so that term isn't in the Meno, but if you say like the logos, what he meant was that, as I say here, the facts that underlie it, that explain it, that allow you to understand how the thing is true. So that's why this comes back to, ironically for Gettier, since he was aware of the Meno, but this is why I'm not trying to just impose upon the idea of knowing epistemologically that Smith doesn't know some potentially irrelevant standard. So the idea here is that if it's going to be epistemological knowledge, I want it to be more, I at least want it to be more than just, oh, I've got an intuition and I really feel it, or other people around me who are really smart agree with me. Any of that stuff. Yeah, again, great stuff, but you can do more. And so what I'm asking here is, well, what I'm saying is, if for whatever reason, such as this one, if you think to be an epistemological knowledge, it's got to be somehow tapping into or offering some potential explanation or account, a la the Meno's conception there, then that takes you back to the worry about whether or not you've got hold of A star or not. And it takes you back to potentially being meta-Gettier. In other words, your belief that Smith is not knowledge, if it's going to be genuinely an epistemological, bit of epistemological knowledge on your part, it might be that you are answerable to potential accounts, just in the way that, yes, epistemologists do offer these things, but you might actually be answerable to them in the way that the meta-Gettier argument lays out. So there's a lot more that I advertised for this, but I think let's just stop there. There's more than enough to discuss here.